So now that we know what types of data we can work with, we now need to know how to actually name our data. So we need to look at that identifier. Remember, the identifier is nothing more than a name. We got to name the bucket, and it has to follow a few rules and a few guidelines. Now, there's a difference between rules and guidelines or conventions. The rules, they absolutely must be followed, or C# won't compile. The guidelines, they're more professional practices to follow that you need to follow in order to make sure that your code is clean and usable by other people. Now, it won't break the program if you don't follow the guidelines, but it could cause other problems in terms of inconsistencies with the rest of the company's code that you're working for or whatnot. So we're going to start off by looking at the different rules. Now, the rules are fairly straightforward, and they make sense for the most part if you think about what you're doing. The first thing is that the name must be unique. A non-unique name in anything in life is pretty useless. So for example, if we're sitting in class and I have two people in the class named Steve, and I say, hey Steve, can you please take down the attendance? I'm going to get two people looking up at me. I need to be more specific. So I might be say, hey Steve Essex, go please take down the attendance for me. Now that's very specific. So the same thing needs to go for our variables. The name must be unique. You got to remember what we're doing here. What we're essentially doing is defining a very new keyword for the C# dictionary. That list that it has that already contains so many words that we're not allowed to use. Which brings me to my next point. The name must be unique not only amongst the variables that you create, but amongst the keywords that already exist in C#. So for example, you can't name a variable private or public or for or anything like that. They must be a completely unique name. The next thing is that it must start, it cannot start with a number. Cannot start with a number. So for example, you can't say one player. That is not valid. But you could say player 1. That'd be just fine. So you got to be very careful with that. The next thing is that no spaces are allowed. You can never have spaces in any way, shape, or form. You also cannot have special characters. However, the following items are allowed. Alpha, so that means A through Z, both capital and lowercase. Numeric, so any number 0 through 9, as long as it doesn't start with 0 through 9, and underscores. For all intents and purposes, I'm going to say do not use underscores though. That is a naming convention. The underscore should not be used in our case. Above and beyond that, those are pretty much the basics of the rules that you must follow. You can't go anywhere around that. And then we have to worry about it needs to be descriptive. So now we get into the conventions. So first and foremost, it needs to be descriptive. Descriptive of what? Well, descriptive of whatever you're storing in it. So for example, the name X. Well, what does X mean? Is X part of an equation? Or is X a location on a graph? What is X? So it needs to be much more specific. So you might say something like this. Player X. That tells me that it's the X value of the player. So it's definitely a location somewhere in a graph or on the screen. So descriptive is a necessity. So the second convention is something called Camel Case. Camel Case is something you've already been doing. Whenever you've been naming your form objects, your controls, you've already been using Camel Case. Camel Case essentially means the first word is lowercase. all following words begin with a capital. So for example, my favorite color. What you can see here is that my is all lowercase, favorite and color are both in uppercase. Only for the first letter though. So where does the term camel case come from? Well, it comes from if you were to draw a line across the top, you would get a hump whenever you get to the capital letters. So you got the two humps, so it kind of looks like a camel. That's the term camel case. So those are all the naming rules and conventions of variables.